A week before the wedding, my fiancée disappeared. No calls, no texts. I drove to our chalet and found her kissing my uncle. When they saw me standing there, I used to think that cold feet before a wedding were normal. People get anxious, disappear for a few hours, clear their heads, and come back ready to promise forever. But when my fiancée, Lena, stopped answering her phone a week before our wedding, no calls, no texts, not even a social media update for 2 days, I knew this wasn't cold feet. This was something else. Lena wasn't the type to vanish. She was meticulous about everything, down to labeling kitchen spices and setting reminders for every appointment. If her phone died, she'd find a way to message. If she was upset, she'd at least send one of her cryptic, need-time texts. But this time, silence. I called her mother first. She sounded half asleep, but startled when I mentioned Lena hadn't come home. She told me she was at your place, she said. My stomach turned. Lena hadn't been here since Monday. It was Thursday now. By noon, I'd called every hospital, her office, even her college roommate. Nobody knew anything. Her car wasn't parked at her apartment complex. It was like she had evaporated. I tried convincing myself that maybe she'd gone somewhere quiet, some yoga retreat or spa trip to de-stress before the wedding. She'd been nervous lately, complaining about the guest list, the budget, my family's involvement. Maybe she needed to breathe. But that illusion shattered when I remembered something. A note on the fridge she'd written 2 weeks ago. Don't forget the spare keys to the chalet. The chalet. It sat 3 hours north, near Lake Beatrice, tucked between pines and sharp hills. My family owned it for decades. My Uncle Martin had helped me renovate it when Lena and I got engaged. She adored the place, the woodsy quiet, the glass porch overlooking the lake. We'd planned to spend our honeymoon there before flying to Italy. That night, after leaving work early, I drove there. The highway was half empty, gray clouds hanging low enough to blur the mountains. I didn't bring flowers or even a plan. Just anger, confusion, and that desperate need for answers that makes your thoughts feel like broken glass. By the time I reached the dirt road leading to the chalet, rain had started. The gravel crackled under the tires, and when I saw the familiar wooden sign, Beatrice Cabin, my chest tightened. Lena's car was parked by the porch. Headlights off. Cold. I killed my engine, stepped out, and felt the wet air sting my face. The house was dark except for a dim flicker coming from inside, like candlelight or maybe a low lamp. My boots squelched against the mud as I walked closer. Every instinct screamed at me to stop. But I couldn't. Through the kitchen window, I saw 2 half-empty wine glasses on the counter. A jacket draped over a chair. Lena's purse, open. Her phone charger plugged into the outlet. I knocked. No answer. I pressed the handle. It wasn't locked. The smell hit first, a mix of red wine, cologne, and something else, warm perfume. I stepped inside quietly, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it in my throat. The hallway light was off, but I could see a faint orange glow coming from the living room. I moved toward it, slow and deliberate, my shoes silent on the wooden floor. Then I heard it. A laugh. Lena's laugh. Soft, familiar, but playful in a way I hadn't heard in months. Then came a man's voice. Low, relaxed, teasing. My vision blurred for a moment. I followed the sound until I reached the doorway to the living room. They were sitting on the couch, Lena, barefoot, wearing one of my old sweatshirts, and my Uncle Martin beside her. His hand rested casually on her thigh as if it belonged there. The table in front of them was cluttered with an open bottle of Merlot, a charcuterie board, and my favorite playlist humming faintly in the background. At first, my brain refused to accept what my eyes saw. I thought, maybe they're talking, maybe he's comforting her, maybe. Then she leaned in and kissed him. Not a short, startled kiss. Not confusion. It was slow, practiced, familiar. My hand was still on the doorway frame when they both froze. Lena's eyes widened, her lips parting as if she'd been caught stealing. Martin's face went blank, like a man who's seen a ghost. For a second, no one moved. Rain hit the roof in a steady rhythm, the only sound filling the silence. Martin was the first to speak. His tone was too calm, too calculated. Gavin, he started, but I didn't let him finish. I didn't yell. I didn't lunge. I just turned around and walked back down the hall. Behind me, I could hear Lena's voice rising, stammering, saying my name, but the words blurred together. My legs felt mechanical, carrying me through the front door before my mind could process what had just shattered. The rain came harder as I reached my car. I got in, slammed the door, and stared at my hands on the steering wheel. They were shaking, not from anger but from disbelief. My uncle, my blood, my fiancé. Together. I started the car, but didn't drive. My headlights illuminated the cabin's windows, where their silhouettes moved frantically, Lena pacing, Martin gesturing. I could almost imagine the excuses forming already, the lines they'd rehearse. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. You don't understand. But there was nothing to understand. Somewhere between the rain and the thunder, something inside me went still. Completely still. I waited there until the lights in the cabin went dark. Only then did I put the car in reverse and drive back to the main road. The windshield wipers struggled against the storm, but my eyes stayed dry. I didn't know what I'd do yet, or what I'd say to my family, but one thing was certain: this wedding was no longer happening. As I reached the highway, I glanced in the mirror one last time. The chalet disappeared behind the trees, its porch light flickering weakly before the rain drowned it out. I thought about how, just a month ago, I had knelt there, imagining a life that now felt like a cruel joke. Some betrayals burned slow. Others cut instantly. This one carved itself so deep I didn't even bleed at first. All I knew was that the silence between us, those 2 days when she disappeared, had finally spoken. And what it said was worse than anything I could have imagined. I didn't sleep that night. I parked behind a gas station halfway to town, engine off, phone face down, mind spinning. The storm outside had slowed to a mist, but inside my head it was chaos. Questions ricocheting between anger and disbelief. How long had it been happening? Who knew? Why my uncle, of all people? When the first gray light crawled over the horizon, I started driving. I didn't go home. I couldn't face my apartment, the ring box sitting on the nightstand, or the wedding plans still pinned to the fridge. Instead, I drove straight to my parents' house. My mother opened the door in her robe, half smiling before realizing something was wrong. I told her everything, every detail, every second of what I'd seen at the chalet. She didn't interrupt once. She just kept looking at me like she wanted to say something, but couldn't. When I finished, she took a deep breath, turned toward the window, and whispered, "I should have said something months ago." That sentence hit harder than anything the night before. She told me there had been signs. Subtle ones. Martin, her brother, had always been too eager to help Lena. He'd offered to review our wedding budget, recommended jewelers, even gave her rides when I was working late. She'd caught him once resting his hand on Lena's shoulder at a family dinner. Too casually, too long. She'd convinced herself it was harmless. She didn't want to start trouble. Then she said the thing that made my stomach twist. He talked about her differently, Gavin. Like she was already family before you even proposed. I left before my father woke up. I couldn't bear to see the look on his face when he found out his brother had done this. By noon, I was parked outside Martin's construction firm. It sat on the edge of town, 2 floors of glass and gray brick, his name plastered across the sign. M. Carver and Sons. The irony of family being part of his business name almost made me laugh. I waited until I saw his truck pull into the lot. He walked out in his usual calm swagger, pressed shirt, coffee in hand, sunglasses like he hadn't just ruined someone's life 12 hours ago. He didn't see me at first. When he did, he froze mid-step. We didn't speak, just stood there in the empty parking lot until I said, "I want the truth. All of it." Martin took off his sunglasses, rubbed his face, and leaned against his truck like he was tired of pretending. He said it had started by accident. That she came to him months ago asking for help with the wedding bills when I was struggling with payments. They'd grown close. It wasn't supposed to happen. I asked him how long. He hesitated. Too long. Then he said something that made me want to hit him. "It's over now. It didn't mean what you think." That was enough for me. I turned around, got back in my car, and left before I did something I'd regret. But his words lingered. "It didn't mean what you think." So that night, I drove back to the chalet. The lights were off this time, but I didn't need them. I knew exactly where he kept his things. Martin had used the upstairs study when he helped with renovations. I went through the drawers, the cabinets, even behind the mirror panels. That's when I found it. A thin leather folder with hotel receipts, all under his company's travel expenses. 5 receipts, each from different towns, each corresponding to weekends Lena had claimed to be on business trips. Dates, signatures, room numbers, all in his handwriting. The realization was almost worse than the discovery itself. It hadn't been some drunken mistake. It had been organized, repeated, deliberate. The first receipt was from nearly a year ago. A year. That meant they'd been together even before I'd proposed. I sat there at his desk for a long time, staring at the papers while the rain outside started again. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy, and I had none left. It felt like something in me had gone cold, mechanical. When I finally left, I didn't take the receipts with me. I took photos. Every page, every date, every signature. The next morning, I called off the wedding venue under the pretense of family emergency. The coordinator said she was sorry to hear that and mentioned something that stopped me mid-sentence. Martin had called her last week to confirm some adjustments to the guest count and catering package. She assumed he was acting on my behalf. He was planning things for my wedding. With my fiancée. That was when everything connected. The early push to move up the date. The insistence that Martin handle the chalet repairs. The way Lena's attitude toward him had shifted, first admiration, then affection, then subtle defensiveness whenever I joked about his involvement. It wasn't just an affair. It was a partnership built in secret right under my family's nose. That evening, I decided to visit Martin's wife, Irene. I hadn't seen her much since she stopped attending family events. Something about travel fatigue, Martin had said. She opened the door cautiously, looking older than I remembered, her face pale and drawn. She didn't even seem surprised to see me. "I've been expecting this," she said quietly. It turned out she'd suspected for months, but never had proof. She'd found hotel loyalty points credited to Martin's account and perfume stains on his shirts that weren't hers. When she confronted him, he gaslighted her so thoroughly that she started to believe she was losing her mind. When I told her Lena's name, she looked like I'd just taken the air out of her lungs. "Her," she whispered. Then she laughed, dry, bitter, almost relieved. He always wanted someone younger, someone easy to impress. I left her the photos I'd taken of the receipts. She didn't cry. She simply nodded and said, "Thank you for confirming what I already knew." By the time I got home, I'd made up my mind. There would be no shouting, no public confrontation. That's what they'd expect. They'd expect emotion, chaos, pleading. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. They'd both stolen something I couldn't get back: trust, dignity, family. The least I could take from them was control. I started planning. First, I quietly contacted the vendors: venue, photographer, caterer, florist. I didn't cancel. I modified, changed the schedule, adjusted the contact email from Lena's shared address to mine alone. Second, I sent polite but vague messages to guests: minor changes to the itinerary, details soon. I wanted everyone to stay curious, not suspicious. And third, I went back to the chalet one last time, not for answers, but closure. The wine bottle was still on the table. The couch still smelled faintly of her perfume. But the air felt hollow, like the space itself was trying to erase what had happened. I packed every trace of myself, my clothes, my tools, the camping gear we'd bought together, and left her things behind. Before locking up, I took one last look around. Then I stacked our unopened wedding invitations in the fireplace and struck a match. The fire caught quickly. Paper curled, ink blistered, her smiling face on the printed save the date warped into smoke. I watched until it all turned to ash. Then I locked the door and left the key under the mat. The road back to town was empty. My phone buzzed twice, unknown number. I didn't answer. Somewhere behind me, Lena and Martin were probably still rehearsing their story, figuring out how to make it sound tragic and misunderstood. But it wouldn't matter. They thought I'd break. They thought I'd disappear quietly like some humiliated groom who couldn't handle betrayal. They had no idea what was coming next. When betrayal is fresh, people expect noise, rage, confrontation. They expect a spectacle. But silence unnerves them more. It gives them time to imagine what you might do next, and that's what I wanted. For the first time in days, I felt clear. Not calm, exactly, but sharp. Every sound, every detail seemed heightened. The hum of my refrigerator, the clock ticking in the kitchen, the faint echo of rain against the window. I sat at the table with my laptop, the wedding guest list open on one screen and Martin's receipts spread out beside me. It was almost poetic. They'd planned their affair like a project, so I'd dismantle their lives the same way. Systematically. I started small. The florist, for instance. She'd been texting Lena about final bouquet arrangements. I replied using Lena's shared wedding email, politely thanking her and asking to send the final invoices to Martin Carver for payment. That one line was all it took. Within 2 days, half the vendors knew Martin's name was linked to the bride's account. The gossip machine works faster than fire. Next came the venue. Our deposit was large, nearly $15,000. I called the manager, pretending to be following up on catering preferences. When she mentioned that Martin had confirmed the headcount changes last week, I sighed just loud enough to sound tired and said, "Yes, my uncle's been handling a lot of the planning lately. My fiancée's very close to him." You could hear the gears turning in her head through the silence that followed. People always pretend to be professional, but curiosity wins every time. I didn't send any mass messages. I didn't post online. I let implication do the work. The next morning, one of my cousins texted me, "You good, man? Heard something weird about the wedding." I replied simply, "Yeah, it's true." And that was enough. By midweek, the rumors had snowballed. Family group chats started splintering. Half believed Lena had cold feet. Others whispered about Martin's history. No one had proof, yet. Meanwhile, Lena finally texted me. First message in 5 days. "We need to talk. Please." I didn't reply. A few hours later, another message. "It's not what you think." Then, "Please pick up. I can explain." I didn't need her explanation. I'd already built my own version of the truth, and unlike hers, mine had evidence. That night, I visited my parents again. My father was pacing the living room, phone in hand, veins visible in his temples. My mother sat in silence on the couch, staring at the muted television. When I walked in, my father looked up and said, "Is it true? About you and Lena? About Martin?" I nodded. He sat down heavily, exhaled through his teeth, and muttered, "That bastard." It wasn't anger that came out of him, it was shame. You could see decades of brotherhood collapsing in his expression. He told me that Martin had stopped by earlier that day, claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that Lena was emotionally unstable, and had confused affection for gratitude. My father threw him out before he could finish the sentence. That was when I knew the timing was perfect. The next night was supposed to be the rehearsal dinner, a final meet and greet for the families and bridal party. I didn't cancel it. I confirmed it. I wanted an audience. I spent the following day preparing. I printed copies of the hotel receipts, Lena's texts to Martin from her shared email, the ones I'd quietly recovered from our cloud drive, and screenshots of her travel itineraries that matched his business trips. I put them all in an envelope labeled vendor documents. Then I made a single group email draft to every person on the wedding vendor list, caterer, photographer, planner, band, and attached the same evidence, and signed, with the subject line, "Client Transparency Notice." It wasn't slander. It wasn't accusation. It was documentation. I scheduled it to send at 7 p.m., the exact time the rehearsal dinner began. When I arrived at the restaurant that evening, the atmosphere was thick with confusion. Half the guests were whispering. Others stared at their phones. You could feel it. Something had already spread. Lena was there, dressed perfectly as always, pretending calm. She tried to approach me the moment I entered, but my mother intercepted her. The look she gave Lena could have cut glass. Martin wasn't there yet. Typical. He liked to arrive fashionably late, to make sure everyone noticed when he walked in. At 7:05, the door opened, and there he was, confident as ever, greeting relatives, smiling like the world wasn't burning around him. But the smiles didn't return this time. People shook his hand politely and moved away. His confusion was visible, eyebrows tightening, glances darting across the room. He hadn't checked his phone yet. At 7:08, he did. I saw his expression collapse in real time, the confident posture folding, eyes narrowing as he scrolled, realizing what everyone else had just received. Lena's phone buzzed next. She opened her inbox, froze, then turned to look at me from across the room. For the first time since I caught them, I looked right back. No anger, no emotion, just acknowledgement. The whispering turned into silence. Then Irene walked in. Martin's wife, dressed in black, eyes red but steady. She walked past every relative without speaking, stopped directly in front of him, and slapped him hard enough that the sound echoed. Then she turned to Lena and said, "You deserve each other." She dropped a stack of papers onto the table, printouts of the same receipts, and walked out. No one moved for several seconds. Martin tried to follow her, but two of my uncles blocked his way. He muttered something under his breath, then turned toward me, as if expecting me to intervene. I didn't. I just raised my glass slightly, a small, calm gesture that said everything words couldn't. Lena's parents were pale, motionless. Her mother started crying quietly. Her father kept staring at her, whispering, "Tell me this isn't true." She didn't answer. The dinner ended in chaos. Some guests left immediately, others stayed in disbelief. I stayed until everyone was gone. Lena tried to approach me once more near the exit, tears streaking her makeup, but I stepped aside without touching her. Outside, the night air felt cold but clean, the kind of air that follows a storm. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed again, messages pouring in. Cousins apologizing, friends asking if I was okay, vendors canceling services out of professional respect. It didn't matter. Everything had already played out exactly as I planned. By morning, the entire town knew. Martin's company name appeared in every whispered conversation, his reputation shredded before sunrise. Irene filed for legal separation that same day. And Lena? She vanished again. Only this time everyone knew why. For years, Martin had been the golden son of the family, the one who made it, the successful businessman, the generous uncle. But by the end of that week, he was a pariah. His business partners dropped him, his clients withdrew contracts, and the office where he once stood like a king now looked like an empty shell. It would have been easy to feel satisfaction, maybe even joy, but I didn't. What I felt was balance. Not justice in a grand sense, just equilibrium restored. When I checked my email later that day, one new message stood out. It was from Lena. No apology, no denial, just one line. "You really think this will make you happy?" I didn't answer. I just archived it, closed my laptop, and went outside. There was something strangely peaceful about the quiet after exposure. The truth had done what it always does. It didn't heal, but it disinfected. And as far as I was concerned, that was enough for now. By the time the sun came up the next morning, the story had already grown legs of its own. You can't contain a scandal that juicy. Family betrayal, wedding collapse, the successful uncle brought low by his own arrogance. It had spread through town, through mutual friends, even through Martin's business circles. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Was it true that the groom's fiancée ran off with his uncle? I didn't answer anyone. I let the silence speak. The first real fallout came 2 days later. Irene called me. Her voice was quiet but firm, like someone who'd spent the night crying and had run out of tears. She said she'd filed for legal separation and frozen every joint account. He used company funds for their trips, she told me. The hotels were charged as business expenses. That single detail destroyed what was left of Martin's career. Within 48 hours, his firm's board called an emergency meeting. I heard later that they demanded his resignation, citing financial misconduct. For a man who'd built his identity on reputation and control, public humiliation was the one punishment he couldn't survive quietly. Meanwhile, Lena's family tried to pick up the pieces. Her father showed up at my parents' house one evening, looking decades older. He asked to speak to me alone. My father refused. "You've done enough," he said, standing in the doorway like a guard. Her father left without another word. Lena herself didn't reach out for almost a week. Then, one evening, just as I was starting to think she'd finally learned silence, there was a knock on my apartment door. When I opened it, she was there, disheveled, pale, wearing the same coat I'd seen her in at the chalet. She looked smaller somehow, like she'd deflated. "Please," she said softly. "Can I just explain?" I stepped aside and let her in. Not because I wanted to hear her, but because I wanted her to see what was left of the person she'd destroyed. The apartment was stripped bare of anything that connected to her. No photos, no gifts, no traces of the life we'd almost shared. She stood in the middle of the room, eyes darting around like she didn't recognize the place. She said she hadn't meant for it to happen, that Martin had manipulated her, that he made her feel understood when I was distant. She said she'd been drinking that night at the chalet, that she'd tried to end things before I found them. I didn't interrupt. I didn't raise my voice. I just listened, because I realized something halfway through her speech. She still didn't understand what she'd taken from me. To her, it was an affair. To me, it was the dismantling of everything I believed in: trust, family, love, even my sense of judgment. When she finally stopped talking, waiting for some reaction, I handed her an envelope from the table. Inside was the prenup draft we'd finalized a month before everything happened. It had her name crossed out, replaced with a note I'd written by hand. "This was your way out. You chose another." She looked up at me, confused. "What's this supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, "that whatever you thought you'd gain from all this, you won't." She tried to reach for me, maybe out of desperation, maybe just instinct. I stepped back. "You destroyed 2 families," I said quietly. "And for what? For someone who won't even have a roof next month." Her face twisted. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No," I said. "It makes me free." She stood there, trembling, waiting for me to say something that would undo it all. But there was nothing left to undo. When she finally left, she slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I didn't follow. I sat down at the table, opened my laptop, and deleted our wedding folder, the last digital trace of our life together. 3 days later, Martin's resignation hit the news. "Local developer steps down amid financial irregularities," the headline read. They didn't mention the affair directly, but everyone knew. The comments were merciless. His business collapsed within a month. His house went up for sale soon after, and Irene quietly moved to stay with her sister in another state. Lena lost her job not long after. Her company cited unprofessional behavior impacting client trust. It was a polite way of saying nobody wanted her around after her name became public gossip. She texted me once more, "You've ruined me." I didn't respond, because she still didn't understand that she'd done it to herself. Months passed. People moved on to other scandals. But the quiet between us, between what was left of our families, never healed. My parents stopped speaking to Martin completely. My father returned his Christmas gifts unopened, and when my grandmother asked why Martin wasn't invited to Thanksgiving, he said, "Ask your son what loyalty costs." Sometimes I drive past the old family chalet. It had been listed for sale, but never found a buyer, probably because locals whispered about what had happened there. One evening, I parked outside just to look at it, the porch light still flickering faintly, paint peeling from the windowsills. It looked haunted, not by ghosts, but by the memory of who I was before that night. A few months later, the deed came up for auction after Martin defaulted on his property taxes. I bought it back quietly, under my own name. No celebration, no announcement. Just paperwork and silence. The first night I spent there again was strange. The air smelled the same, pine and damp wood, but the house felt hollow, stripped of every warmth it once had. I lit a fire in the same hearth where I'd burned the wedding invitations. The flames crackled, soft and steady, reflecting off the lake through the window. For the first time since everything happened, I didn't feel anger. Not even sadness. Just peace. A hard-earned, quiet kind of peace that doesn't come from revenge. It comes from finally letting the truth settle into place. In the morning, I found something unexpected. On the porch railing was a small white envelope, damp from dew. No address, no handwriting on the front. Inside was a single note. "I'm sorry. I wish I could take it back." No signature, but I didn't need one. I set it on the table, watched the sunlight creep across the paper, and let it burn in the fireplace without a word. There was no satisfaction in her apology, only confirmation of what I already knew. She didn't regret what she'd done, only what it had cost her. That afternoon, I stood on the dock overlooking the lake. The water was perfectly still, mirroring the clouds like glass. Somewhere in that reflection, I saw myself. Not the man who was betrayed, not the one who exposed them, but someone quieter, simpler, unburdened. People like to say revenge doesn't solve anything. Maybe they're right. But sometimes, revenge isn't about payback. It's about closure, the kind that restores your balance when others have taken too much. Martin vanished from public life. Rumor had it he moved to a smaller town up north, working under someone else's company name. Lena stayed local, trying to rebuild her reputation, but every time she applied for work, someone whispered her name and the job disappeared. Eventually, she ended up at a small real estate office, answering phones instead of selling homes. I didn't gloat. I didn't visit. I just lived. And sometimes, late at night, when I sat by the lake with a glass of wine, I'd think about how fragile life can be, how 1 week, you're planning forever, and the next, you're burning the ashes of it. But even then, I wasn't bitter. I'd simply learned what most people spend decades ignoring. That peace doesn't come from trusting others blindly. It comes from knowing when to walk away and never looking back. As the sun set behind the trees, the water turned gold. The same lake that had once witnessed my heartbreak now reflected something new. Not forgiveness, not joy, just stillness. And that, I realized, was enough.